Call the Housing and Human Welfare Committee to order on Wednesday, June 5th at 3:11 p.m. Actually, I didn't even pull up the agenda. There's only one item, right? The resolution. Thank you. So first, we'll do a roll call. To my right,
Elly Tierney, Ward 1.
Alderman Marc Rodriguez, Ward 5 is chair, and we have vacancy, obviously, so all current members are here, as well as our esteemed colleague, Alderman Savidge, and our esteemed colleague, Takia, of course. Approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda.
A second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
First item of business before the committee is approval of the minutes from May 9th. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the May 9th meeting?
So moved.
I'll second that. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So the only legislation that we are discussing today before the committee is R 2619 that was introduced last Monday. Rental operating licenses and inspections of Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis properties for the purpose of requiring rental operating licenses and inspections of Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis properties. We also have here in the audience Sally Nash and Lori as well. Pushner, right? It's how you, Pushner, sorry. Thank you, Sally, for being here. She's our Acting Director of Planning and Zoning. And
Good afternoon.
Thank you. And so obviously, given that there's active litigation, we're not going to speak much about past practices or getting into the past, but the conversation, the objective of today is to set in motion what's going forward in terms of this resolution, in terms of the will of the city, and requiring and beginning to require licenses and inspections of HACA properties. And so with that, I do want to take the time to just, for those who may be listening on, and just to read it into the record, the resolution, which gives kind of a high-level overview of how we're getting here. And then, Dr. Nash, if then you can also talk a little bit about the kind of high-level process of the planning and zoning and the inspection department takes into licensing and inspecting. And so we get a general overview of that. That would be great. But I'll start out just by reading the resolution, which reads, for the purpose of requiring rental operating licenses and inspections of Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis properties. Whereas the City of Annapolis has the primary authority under its police powers to provide for the general welfare of all residents of the City of Annapolis, and whereas the Housing Authority, or HACA, provides public housing to hundreds of Annapolis citizens and their families, and whereas the City of Annapolis and HACA have an obligation to protect the health and safety of public housing residents, and whereas the City of Annapolis and HACA have the responsibility to ensure that HACA properties are held to the same safety, sanitary, and habitable standards found throughout the city, and whereas pursuant to 24 CFR 902.2, federal law requires the U.S. Department or HUD to inspect the physical conditions of public housing, but such inspections do not relieve HACA from its own obligation to inspect its housing units, and whereas in addition to conducting inspections, HACA is responsible for emergency, routine, and preventative maintenance services. And whereas pursuant to Annotated Code of Maryland 12403, Maryland law requires all public housing properties of HACA be subject to the planning, zoning, sanitary, health, fire, housing, subdivision, and building laws, ordinances, codes, rules, and regulations that apply to the City of Annapolis. And whereas Chapter 17.44 of the Annapolis City Code requires the city to license and inspect all rental housing units in the city. And whereas rental operating licenses require that properties be subject to inspections to determine whether the conditions of the rental housing units comply with Chapter 17.44 of the City Code. And whereas the purpose of the requirements under Chapter 17.44 of the City Code that residential rental units be licensed is to make certain that rental units are safe for habitation. And whereas pursuant to HCD 12506B, Maryland law permits HACA to make an agreement with the city that makes exceptions to its sanitary buildings, housing, fire, health, subdivisions, or other similar laws, rules, regulations, and ordinances. And whereas in 1965, the city entered into a cooperation agreement with HACA where the city is permitted to waive requirements of the city's building code as are reasonable and necessary to promote economy and efficiency in the development and at the same time safeguard health and safety. And whereas there's currently no federal, state, or local law prohibiting the city of Annapolis from enforcing its local laws on public housing agencies. And whereas as a result of this cooperation agreement with HACA, the city of Annapolis currently does not require inspections nor rental operating licenses for HACA properties. And whereas there have been numerous and ongoing complaints made by residents of public housing that health and safety concerns have neither been addressed effectively nor efficiently by HACA. Now therefore be it resolved by the Annapolis City Council that the city of Annapolis begin requiring rental operating licenses for HACA properties, and it be further resolved by the Annapolis City Council that the city of Annapolis begin inspecting HACA units under the city's rental licensing program, and be it further resolved by the Annapolis City Council, the city of Annapolis work with HACA to prioritize the correction of deficiencies within HACA properties. Thank you. I think we all, both the city and HACA obviously share the goal of making sure that every resident, especially a resident of public housing, lives in a safe, habitable, clean, affordable unit. And that is the goal here. The city needs, in my opinion, and I know my colleagues share this thought, we need to be holding as HACA as a landlord accountable in our supervisory role to make sure that the conditions that public housing residents are living in are to the same level and the same standards as everywhere else in the city. And that's the goal here. There are obviously a few elements to this going forward, given that the policy of non-inspecting licensing has been around for decades. There's a lot of work and a lot of thought that needs to be put into how we go forward, because ultimately the goal is for every resident to live in, like I said, adequate housing, and understanding that there is redevelopment plans in progress and envisioned for the HACA properties. And obviously we want to support and respect that. And this conversation is separate from that, where we are talking about licensing and inspecting, so that as of today, people can feel safe and healthy in their own homes, and know that the city is looking out for them, as is our duty too. And so there are three elements really here to this process. One is the licensing, the second is the inspections that are a requirement of the licensing, and then also want to touch on what's on the complaint process, or as is currently, and how we envision that it needs to be. You know, since we've been talking about this, we have had meetings with some of the HACA leadership around, together with our chief code enforcement officer, around what a plan looks like to do in a responsible, timely, and practical way. Just want to give a little update on that, and then you can hear. So my understanding is some of the main or priority items that our chief code enforcement officer identifies as a must, in terms of life-threatening or safety, include the need for functioning in city code smoke detectors and smoke alarms. Gas ranges need to be operating properly. Mold, obviously, and we had a good meeting earlier where HACA has actually developed, or in the process of finalizing development of a protocol following EPA guidelines and professional remediation guidelines in terms of how to treat and remediate that. And so our chief code enforcement officer seemed agreeable to receive that and work with HACA in terms of when inspections are conducted and mold is identified, that they be treated timely through this proper protocol. And so I know the conversation around mold had always been kind of a sticky one. We need to make sure that the conversation of mold is a tier 1 issue going forward in terms of the inspection needs, understanding that a lot of these buildings are decades old and many haven't been maintained to city code standards for various reasons.
So could we elaborate on that a little bit? So is HACA prepared to, are they researching certified, I'm not sure in mold remediation if this company, I'm sure that's their specialty and licensed and all that, or do they have a list of such companies or gearing up for that, or is that?
So I'll obviously, I have to defer to HACA to say that, and then in their
Okay.
continuing conversations with planning and zoning and John Manassas and Sally Nash.
Okay.
But from just preliminary, there will be, my understanding is protocol based on professional remediation guidelines, yeah, exactly, or EPA guidelines. Instead of, because there have obviously been reports before of perhaps trying to address mold, not through a professional way of removing drywall, was actually help spread it, or in some cases painting over it. And so obviously that no longer can or should be the way. And I know from my understanding is that HACA is prepared to work with that. And then other items, obviously sprinkler heads, fire extinguishers, electrical outlets, leaking, plumbing, and it's all, so all of these will be, I see, addressed through an inspection process, and maybe Dr. Nashton, you can talk a little bit about more of the process going forward. But before we get there, I just want to touch on one of the complaint processes as well. Currently, because we weren't inspecting, essentially, if a resident of public housing called the city, we would let HACA, the appropriate HACA personnel know of the complaint, and that they would address it directly and give the city an update. In our conversations earlier, and the way forward with this inspection and licensing requirement policy, that needs to change to where the city residents know that if they're coming to complain to the city, that we are going to verify directly in collaboration with HACA what's going on and make sure that the remedies are necessary to take corrective action are taken in a timely manner. And so that'll be an added component as part of this process as well that I think is important. Yeah.
Do we have assurances from the housing authority that they will allow these inspections and licensing to take place?
So in preliminary conversations from earlier, they indicated that yes, and as part of requiring licensing and inspecting, my understanding is if there's some sort of blocking of inspections in any way, shape, or form, we can actually fine them so that we can enforce penalties. Whereas before they said don't come onto the property, the city was following that.
Just to give us, I guess, a perspective, Sally, do you happen to know, I know there's 790 HACA units, potential rental units. How many citywide? I just want to see what kind of percentage this is of our total inventory, just to get a sense of the
I can answer that. We have 5,040
okay,
rental units
5,040 citywide.
citywide,
Okay.
and so 790.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's
What was the second number?
So total multifamily or housing or rental units, we have multifamily rental properties. We have 5,040
Okay.
total. The HACA public housing units are at 790.
okay.
But Dr. Nash, do you want to just go ahead and give the background and kind of the steps?
All right, well, the last few weeks we've been trying to figure out a way to prioritize how we would do the inspections once the new fiscal year starts. We can do them geographically, we can do them based on tier 1 issues that we know of already, or we can do some kind of combination of the two based on staff availability. We're really looking to you to guide us in terms of priorities. What I'm hearing is our priorities are life safety above everything else. It's going to take us a while to fold these in to our schedules. 790 is a pretty high percentage of, compared to 5,000. So it's not going to be immediate. That's another good justification for focusing on the most egregious issues. We do still need some guidance on some of the issues like smoke detectors and what the game plan is for that. My feeling is that battery operated smoke detectors are better than nothing, but it is not the standard that we require for other rental properties. So, we need guidance on how to tackle those kinds of issues.
Yeah, and so that's actually a great, thank you, Dr. Nash.
Yeah.
That's a great point because, and that's something that, from our earlier meeting with Hakan and John Manassa, we have to further discuss and also internally among more professional staff and so forth. But it is an important issue in talking about the practical nature of making sure that every resident is being given the same level of safety and health standard, security and accountability that we do throughout the entire city, and also understanding certain practical natures of things, and ultimately, by not sacrificing health and safety standards at all, can there be perhaps another means to achieve some of the corrective actions. So for example, where there are smoke alarms or smoke detectors that aren't functioning or aren't there, located where they're supposed to, like in every bedroom and outside every bedroom. For example, Newtown 20.
Yeah.
The city code currently requires full wiring of or smoke detectors. If we were to do that in Newtown, if they were to do that in Newtown 20, that from previous estimates, my understanding is that would be like an overwhelming kind of amount of money that for property that is the first on the list to be redeveloped. Also balancing the conversation of the dates for demolition and redevelopment of all the properties are fluid and ongoing, so we never know it's 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or 4,
What's
so-
what's preventing that from being pinned down, do you think?
We can
yeah.
ask HACA directly that, but therefore the need to start addressing these things today versus waiting for a fixed period, obviously, as well. But the question is, instead of rewiring, for example, Newtown 20, can the 10-year lithium battery smoke detectors perform the same level of function in terms of the health and safety standards that we're seeking? And if so, what's a lawful way to make that exception?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's we can rely on our cooperation agreement that we have, where it allows us to deviate from the code for efficiency and economy, at the same time as ensuring the health and safety standards. And so those are conversations we'll need to continue to be having in the very short term, so that as we begin requiring licensing and inspection, like they know what to expect as well, because obviously they want to get the units in order up to city code before the inspections.
Yeah, that's a major decision based on a potential demolition, and that's why it's really important to pin that down. I mean, a 1-year slip makes a big difference. At the same time, it's probably the most in need of addressing. So and we would need to have, that's where we would need your help, Sally, on how we, for lack of a better word, I hate to say deviate, but deviate from Title 17 on hardwired, because that is a big investment on something that's short-lived.
Right.
We need to look at that right away,
Yeah,
and at the same time, get in there.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of reasoning of the language in terms of working with HACA to prioritize these and do it in a responsible and practical but timely way, because the end game is to support them and the residents to get to the ultimate goal, obviously, of what public housing will look like in the future, which for the betterment of every resident who's currently in public housing, and at the same time today making sure that they're not breathing in toxic mold, that if there's a fire, it'll be detected timely in order to prevent and save lives. Alderman Savidge.
Thank you. So, Dr. Nash, you said that something along the lines of it's going to be difficult to do all these because of essentially, I guess, staff concerns at the time, because they already have, I know, a full plate, I imagine. One thing the council could possibly do is, because I know we most likely will be approving a new property maintenance inspector in this year's budget. However, I know it's going to take time to hire, so we could always talk about, with the Finance Committee, about transferring some of our emergency funds to get a contractual inspector in the meantime, in the interim, if that would help.
I think, I mean, this is already June. If we know that that position is definitely going to be in the budget, we can start advertising. You know, we can get that process underway. We'll have, it'll be the next fiscal year before we know it. So those processes take a long time to get rolling. But I'm reluctant to start anything till I know for sure what the budget's going to look like.
Well, we'll know on Monday,
Okay.
probably, but I think it's probably a safe bet that'll get included in this year's budget. But again, if that's delayed for whatever reason, we could entertain transferring money.
Okay.
That's why we have those emergency accounts. I mean, it seems like a very important thing to be.
Okay, I appreciate
Spending
that. I
money
think
on.
it will take a little bit of time to work all of the details out in any case. So,
Alderman Savidge is correct. We'll probably know Monday. I know the Finance Committee, nobody has said no to this additional property inspector.
okay.
So that looks positive. How many presently do you have?
3.
3, right, okay, 3 that Mary, Adam, and,
Jeanette.
yeah, okay. And you're right, this is 15% of the pie is this
Mhm.
effort. So, okay.
Yeah, and from speaking with staff previously and earlier, and like, when this kind of initiative had been taken before, it was overwhelming on all accounts to just do them all at once, right, is my understanding. And so doing it, like you said, by tier or geography, and then scheduling a plan around that, and sticking to that plan would work better on all accounts. Do you agree with that?
It would definitely be better for staff in terms of being able to tackle the problem more systematically.
Yeah.
And I imagine for HACA as well, to not be quite as overwhelmed.
Yeah. And when do you think such a plan could be put in place?
I think we've been working on it the last few weeks. I think we can have everything ready at the beginning of the fiscal year.
Right.
You know, we already know where a lot of the issues are and what they are.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And then I also just want to point out for the record that there is $80,000 in the budget as community grants for HACA in order to help support them for using that money to pay the rental license application fee of $100 a unit times 790 units. And so that is something I think probably the most of the body will be supportive of, because obviously the goal is, with the resources as a property manager or landlord that HACA has, that they're addressed or they're used more directly into the residents' units for their health and safety as well, like prioritized.
Right, that's a good point. It's between that and the property inspector are the financial parts we really need to have in place.
Yeah.
So are we dedicating that bucket of money for just inspections, or is there talk about any sort of, I don't know, escrow amount for unknowns, or is it just going to address inspections?
Well, I mean, that's definitely a conversation we'll have going forward in terms of what you're referencing. But I think in terms of solely talking about licensing and inspecting like we do every other rental unit in the city, which is the goal here,
Yeah.
this 80,000 and is specifically for the rental application fee,
Right.
which inspection is included in that.
Right. 790 times 100, right.
Yeah. Is there any other comments, questions, concerns? Dr. Nash, do you want to say anything else on the matter?
No, I mean, I think we're all hoping to work together and, support each other, and I'm glad that we're all here talking about this. So it's time to do something.
Great. Well, if I don't have anything further on this. I'd just like to take action on recommending. So if you want to, is there a motion to recommend?
Let me just add
Yeah.
so fiscal year would be July 1, but we need a month of planning. So it's not like, and just want the public to know that we're going to spend this month planning and talking and making sure things are lined up so that when we start inspecting, it will just
Yeah, absolutely. I know HACA leadership is already in conversations with our city staff to understand exactly what the requirements of our city code are and get rolling on those, because obviously from a landlord's point of view, they prefer less violations for inspection, because if not, there's potential penalties around that. So it's important for both sides to be understanding what the playing field looks like, so we can get there
And thank you.
together.
Thank you for reading the legislation, because I support your comment in the Capitol that, this isn't any other motive other than to secure the health and safety of our residents. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you.
On that note, I move that we vote in favor of Resolution 26-19.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. So there's nothing else on the agenda. Thank you, Dr. Nash. Oh. So is there a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Thank you. Second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.